Hi everyone, my name is Sanaz Haghani and I am welcome to the conversation with the 8th Collegiate Paper Triennial Artist Panel discussion. Today we have Lynn Sures, Erika Honson and Ciel Rodriguez. This conversation is a series of panel discussions featuring the 8 triennial selected artists in conversation about the challenges and rewards inherent in working with paper as a medium. And we will have more panel discussions, and as I mentioned, it's a series. And so please stay tuned. We will announce the upcoming conversation with the artists during the triennial exhibition journey. The Collegiate Paper Art Triennial originated in 1999, co-founded by Lynn Sures and Cindy Bowden. And Lynn will talk about the original history of triennial later. In 2019, North American Hand Papermakers adopted the Collegiate Paper Art Triennial, and for the 8th Triennial, we received 138 artworks from 83 students from 17 colleges and universities across the United States. Our jurors, Mina Takahashi, she's the editor at Hand Papermaking magazine. Karen Kunc, she's a professor emerite at University of Nebraska, Lincoln. And Erin Zona, she's the artistic director and at Women's Studio Workshop. They selected 40 works by 37 students from 11 schools, The triennial will, right now it's on display at Cedar Crest College at Center for Visual Research Gallery in Allentown, Pennsylvania. It will go to the Evanston Arts Center in Evanston, Illinois, from January 14 to February 19, 2023, and then it will travel to Morgan Conservatory in Cleveland, Ohio, from June 23rd until August 5th, 2023, and finally it will go to Linden House Arts Center in Athens, Georgia, from October 7th, 2023 to January 13 in 2024. Okay, let me introduce our panelists. Okay, so this panel was, our first panelist is Lynn Sures. She is a multidisciplinary artist working in handmade paper, pulp painting, drawing, artist books, printmaking, ceramic sculpture, and port steel. She's founding director of the National Collegiate Paper Triennial exhibition and of the annual Fabriano Paper Print Book Italian Study Abroad experience. She was guest editor of the 2016 winter issue of Hand Papermaking magazine on the papermaking of Italy. Her artist books have appeared in several published collections, including the Penland Book of Handmade Books. She was a professor and chair of fine art at the Corcoran College of the Art and Design in Washington, D.C. until its close in August 2014. She has also taught at Columbia College, Chicago, University of Art in Philadelphia, and George Washington University in Washington, D.C. She regularly offers workshops at centers such as Penland School and has been a visiting artist at universities and museums nationally and internationally. Lynn, do you want to start? Welcome. Hi.
Thank you, Sanaz, for the introduction. Yeah, I'm gonna share my screen and just give a brief history of how the whole thing came about that we're celebrating today. So give me a second. So hopefully that's coming across okay. So I'll go ahead and get started now. I wanted to say hello to everyone. Before I get going, it's just so great to be even a small part of this conference and a part of NAHP. When I was a student printmaker and painter, because of my interest in making prints and drawings, which are almost always done on a paper substrate, I found and read a book by someone named Dard Hunter called Papermaking. And I learned about historical papermaking. But I never knew there was such a thing as handmade paper being made in the present day. In the late 80s, when I began teaching etching in Washington, D.C., I met a teacher from the Corcoran School of Art who invited me to sit in on her papermaking class. So I learned some of the basics of beating pulp, pigmenting it, and pulling sheets. It was a long and mysterious road, though, since none of us paper-curious artists really knew of anyone with broad understanding of papermaking to teach us all the methodology and technique that most contemporary students have easy access to and might even take for granted. Most everyone I knew who was motivated to work with handmade paper did most of their learning by trial and error during this pre-internet time. There was a brand new magazine called Hand Papermaking we started subscribing to. And in our area, Pyramid Paper and Prints, now called Pyramid Atlantic, had just opened up nearby. It took years for us to meet people who came in occasionally from across the country, who knew more about beading or coloring or about fibers than we did. I don't mean to imply that no knowledge existed. It just wasn't widely available to people like me, who had attended art school where no one yet mentioned or knew of handmade paper, and who, as a young mother, didn't frequent workshops or travel for the small national conferences we started hearing about. Eventually, things changed and the story continues. I did finally find some experts who explained the technical processes much more fully, and I got to be someone who could make handmade paper do what I wanted it to do in my work. My own personal interest, since I was trained as a painter and printmaker, was in using colored pulp to make my paintings. I was offered a job teaching painting at the Corcoran, so I was eligible to use their paper studio during my small slots of free time. And I put together a series of landscape paintings, which were exhibited at the Baltimore Museum of Art. Everything was happening pretty quickly. Finally, I too was teaching papermaking at the Corcoran. Time passed, and I traveled to Atlanta in the late 1990s to meet with Cindy Bowden, then the director of the Robert C. Williams Paper Museum, who had offered me a solo exhibition of my handmade paper works. I was excited about my upcoming show, but also about something else. I had been formulating an idea to present to Cindy when we met. At the museum, while we talked about my show, I slipped in a proposal that we could together organize and direct a national competition and exhibition available only to students of hand paper making in colleges, universities, and art schools across the country to celebrate their creative work done primarily with handmade paper. Cindy is an incredibly capable and well-connected person and immediately embraced the idea, coming up with many ways that we could make this a very ambitious and well-funded undertaking. We received a large grant from Crane Paper, and we worked together to form a team of professors from many states around the country, each one volunteering to take on one of the jobs needed to pull off an impressive national traveling exhibition. So many schools from across the country responded to our student-designed call for entries, submitting work from their own papermaking students for the competitive show. It was an amazing moment when the first National Collegiate Handmade Paper Art Exhibition opened and filled the exhibition spaces at the Paper Museum in 1999. We met many students who had traveled there with their parents to see their work in handmade paper being shown at a prestigious venue. The show would honor everyone involved in the burgeoning effort to disseminate knowledge about how one could make handmade paper art. The key players were the college instructors who did their research on aspects of the craft they weren't familiar with and connected with other instructors and makers through conferences. Through specialized workshops like Penland, Arrowmont, and Haystack, the art and craft of papermaking was becoming widespread, and national figures were teaching teachers as well as students. And the university research programs, like those at the University of Iowa, Rutgers University, and the University of Alabama, among many others, connected different elements of papermaking, putting in reach of students aspects such as book arts and printmaking and textiles. The final key was the students themselves, those who had the interest, drive, confidence, and inventiveness to learn to use hand papermaking techniques to make their own art in a way that was unique and creative enough to stand out among their peers. Every 3 years, the instructors and students at the college and university programs were responding to the diverse jurors and the different locales for the triennial and the wonderful premiums and freebies that were being offered by the excellent supporters like Twin Rocker and Carriage House and Hand Papermaking magazine, making each new exhibition a kind of discovery process for everyone involved. Artist papermakers you know well, including installation artists Megan Singleton and May Babcock, emerging artist Sanaz Haghani, and book artist Sean Sheehy, experienced the excitement as students of having their work seen by prominent jurors and a national audience in the Collegiate Paper Triennials. Now some of the venues create panels such as this one, giving students another kind of voice and agency in sharing their experience with handmade paper art. The Triennial exhibition always has reflected diverse artistic and technical explorations of gifted student artists who are mentored by an expanding pool of highly engaged and supportive teachers. The sizable effort made by these papermaking communities within our colleges and universities to participate in the triennials helps keep the art of hand papermaking at the forefront of an ever-changing culture. Fast forwarding to 2022, the National Collegiate Paper Triennial has reached the age of 23 years, older than many of the current exhibitors with this newest edition. Beginning in 2019 with the 7th Collegiate Paper Triennial, the North American Hand Papermakers embraced the exhibition as one of the 3 major national triennial exhibitions they would sponsor as part of their organizational mission. a sponsorship that is continuing with the 8th Triennial that we're celebrating just now. With the simple idea of promoting student achievement in the field of handmade paper art, the Triennial consistently and persistently highlights creative accomplishments by our up-and-coming student paper artists. Hearty congratulations to the student exhibitors in the 8th Collegiate Handmade Paper Triennial. And I'll just end with this list of the different venues that have different schools who have sent their students to participate in the triennials over these past 23 years. And I'll hand it back to you then, Sanaz. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Lynn. It's always wonderful to hear about the triennial exhibition and because I am one of them and I know how it affects my professional career. And I think the reason that I am here now because of the triennial. So, and I'm happy and thank you for everyone to do that. So I'm going to introduce the next panelist. Let me share my screen again. And there we go. So our next panelist is Erika Honson. She is one of the selected artists for the 8th Triennial. Erika is a Philadelphia-based printmaker and book artist. Erika grew up in Champlain, Minnesota, and received her BFA in graphic design from the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth in 2019, and her MFA in book arts and printmaking at the University of Arts in Philadelphia. In 2022, she is a letterpress studio assistant and at Common Press at UPenn, and she teaches printmaking at the Lower College of Art and Design and letterpress workshops at the Soapbox Community Print Shop and Zine Library. She is a collaborative offset lithography print at the Brovsky Center for Publication Arts at UR. Erika.
Great, thank you. And you can just go to the next slide and start playing the video. Great, thank you. So I am Erika Honson, as Sanaz said. So I'd like to just talk about a couple different projects that I was working on in the past year during my final year in the MFA book and print program at UArts. So this video right now is an artist book that I made called If Shoe Prints in Concrete Are Urban Fossils. And the book leads the reader through a sequence of vignettes of existential contemplations on meaning and mortality. The prose is introspective, expressing a slight paranoia of being watched, surveilled, and followed. I chose to use a hemp and cotton blend handmade paper for its strength, rigidity, and tactile qualities. The natural color of the fibers was used as the background for pulp paintings inspired by sidewalks and concrete textures. I used mark making tools and techniques that I learned making decorative paste papers to create the pulp paintings. And it has a black abaca cover in which I mixed together unpigmented, unbleached abaca pulp with pulp that I had pigmented black to make the fibers more visible. Throughout the book and in its cover, there are all deckled edges, either torn or left uncut. Both of these decisions were made to soften the concrete textures and make the edges of the book kind of blurred like a vignette. The typography functions as imagery, illustrating movements described in the prose. While the text is sometimes set in a straight line, the majority is handset type on a curve. Its presentation along a single line guides the reader through the book. This plays with how readers are used to reading and hopefully grounds them, even if they become distracted by the unfamiliarity of the binding structure. While the majority of the prose was handset in Italian Old Style, the 2 lines of fleeting thoughts were handset with modular letter forms designed using ornaments. The ornaments used make the letters look architectural, implying buildings or structures along the narrator's path. You can move on to the next slide now too, please. We'll just skip the end of this. So here I just have that typography that I was talking about. I just wanted to share some of my lockups because they were fun and a little nutty. But here you can see some of the typesetting, handset type on a curve on the left, and then the 2 images on the right are of that handset type using ornaments and that I was talking about. And on the next slide, the binding is a variation of an accordion with 2 sheets joined by a woven hinge, which was inspired by Claire Van Vliet and adopted from her binding of Recollect Italy by Judy Haswell. Her book structure was designed to bind single sheets together into a codex, but I adopted it to join a deckled edge with a folded edge. And the book can be read as a codex with fold out, standing fully open, or somewhere in between. When the reader reaches what appears to be the back of the book, they will find that they have not reached the end. The binding was designed so that the book could be read cyclically. The reader is led around the pages and back through to the beginning. If Shoe Prints in Concrete Are Urban Fossils was written and designed for the reader to step into the narrator's mind. If you go to the next slide, you can see all those pictures. The text is a fragmented and narrated stream of consciousness. The type on a curve suggests movement perceived in the periphery of the narrator, while the modular typography implies place. The binding structure transfers the narrator's overwhelming feelings to the reader, and the paper is the sidewalk passing beneath the narrator's feet. Next slide, please. So now I'll get into talking about this series of 9 pulp paintings that I created for my master's thesis, one of which is in the Triennial exhibition, the Abaca pieces in the Triennial. So I was investigating the properties of a range of 8 different fibers using 1 for each piece. Both the handmade paper base sheet and the pulp paint were made with the same fiber. I was focusing on fibers used in Western papermaking, including cotton, abaca, sisal, kanaf, bamboo, flax, jute, and hemp. For this series, the paper is both the substrate and the substance, though I'm specifically interested in the differences of each fiber's visual qualities, and not their qualities as a substrate to hold printed matter. I combined controllable and uncontrollable processes, pulp pouring, pulp painting, and different drying methods to manipulate the sheets before and after they are dry. The exploration of materials is just as important to me as the content and image making. Next slide, please. Over the course of the past couple years, I've been sketching gestures that resonated with me or haunted me, or writing myself a note about them. Some of them I saw often, some of them I only witnessed once or twice. But I drew the majority of my gestures from those that I witnessed in my daily life. People I passed on the street, waiting next to me at a bus stop or on the bus, people I saw in parks or coffee shops, in conversations with others or on their own. I would then perform these gestures on my own, holding the positions and taking note of where I'm holding tension in my body. And in doing so, trying to understand where someone else was holding this tension in theirs. It's kind of an introspective interrogation of the gestures, not just to try to understand the emotion behind it, but also to provoke that emotion within myself. Next slide, please. I want to know what people are thinking and feeling, that which they do not communicate through words. I decided which gestures would be included in this series at the start of each new painting, depending on which was resonating with me or haunting me that week. I'm interested in what is conveyed by individual images and what larger narrative is created through looking at them in series. Towards the end, I tried to plan more and fill in holes in a narrative I saw emerging, so it's not entirely random, but it remains vague and devoid of a greater context, at least to the viewer. Next slide, please. I excluded gendered anatomy in an attempt to queer the body and exhume the gestures from the confines of a strictly identity-based analysis. Many of the portraits in this series are perceived as reflecting some amount of stress or anxiety, possibly intensified by the cockling of the paper. They're also perceived to be depicting reflection itself or introspection. Next slide, please. The most controversial responses have been to the flax piece, which is this one. Some see it as representing abject desperation, while others see it as open, vulnerable, and possibly optimistic. I think I appreciate the response to this piece the most, the fact that people see both hope and hopelessness. Our assumptions on which emotion is being communicated is based on our own personal experiences. When it comes to the meaning of a gesture without context, I appreciate that we both don't know and can't know its significance. While portraits usually include faces, I have redacted the faces by painting only their silhouettes or by cropping them out of the image entirely. With the hands rendered realistically in full value, they become the focal point instead. The absence of a face asserts that the identity of the subject isn't important for the viewer to know. I'm not painting portraits of people, I'm painting portraits of their gestures and possibly their emotions. Next slide, please. I found Quintilian, a Roman educator and rhetorician, quoted in an illustrated encyclopedia of traditional symbols. He says, "The hands may almost be said to speak. Do we not use them to demand, promise, summon, dismiss, threaten, supplicate, express aversion or fear, question or deny? Do we not use them to indicate joy, sorrow, hesitation, confession, penitence, measure, quantity, number, and time? Have they not the power to excite and prohibit, to express approval, wonder, shame? To the world, our faces are identifier, but my sense of self is more intertwined with my hands. I pay attention to how people use their hands, which sometimes makes more sense to me than how they use their words." Explorations of gestures and pulp paint is a series of pulp painting gestures, all involving hands. Next slide, please. And you can play the video if it works. I knew I wanted to work at a scale that has the potential to occupy a lot of the viewer's field of vision and to paint figures that are often larger than life, partially as a kind of confrontation. Scale also adds a degree of abstraction in some of the pieces. The approximately 41 by 47 inch mold is the largest one that I had access to at UArts. I thought these dimensions were well suited to most of the gestures I chose. However, there were a few that didn't want to be so square, so I found other ways to exploit the dimensions. So this is just a video of my pulp painting or pulp pouring process and the setup that I was working with. And on the left is the first painting that I made, which was with cotton. And you can go to the next slide, please. There is some variation due to the natural color of each fiber, so some pieces are warmer than others. But I felt and still feel strongly that it would have been wrong to use any pigment other than black or white. Color could ply an emotion, and especially here, they would be inextricable. Color could give context, which would be too much information. They needed to be painted in grayscale. Using color would be like drawing a conclusion. These portraits are inconclusive. Each is a fragment. And on the left here, I just wanted to include this image to illustrate those ways that I found to exploit the dimensions of the mold. So in this case, I was painting 2-up, which is a more of a printmaking thing, but putting 2 images on the same sheet to create 2 separate pieces. So both of these are bamboo, which is the only fiber that I used for 2 pieces. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erica, for sharing your work. And
Thank you so much.
thank you. Okay, our next panelist is, let me share my screen again. Is Ciel Rodriguez. Ciel is a paper maker, letterpress printer, and bookbinder from Atlanta, Georgia. She completed her BFA at the School of the Arts Institute of Chicago with an emphasis in analog photography and papermaking. She recently received her MFA from the University of Georgia in printmaking and book art, as well as museum studies. While at the UGA, Rodriguez was awarded a Wilson Center graduate research grant for her thesis research in large-scale papermaking, and was a graduate assistant teaching for printmaking and book art. From handmade paper and alternative photography to artist books, Ciel artistic practice focuses on enveloping her reviewers and readers in quiet expanses, evoking states of mind or states of remembrance. Ciel.
All right, hello. My name is Ciel Rodriguez, and thank you, Sanaz, for such a wonderful introduction. I kind of just put a smattering of things in here, and I'm just really excited to talk about papermaking all the time. So I will start at the beginning. I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and I actually went for analog photography. So for my first 2 years there, I was in the darkroom all the time. And I was learning about light sensitive chemistries like cyanotype and Van Dyke brown prints. And then in my junior year, I was actually convinced by some friends and faculty to take a papermaking class, a bookmaking class, and a letterpress class all at the same time, which was a lot, but also very exciting and completely changed the trajectory of my art practice. I started really by embedding those silver gelatin prints into my paper works and getting that kind of like fogged over image and really thinking about memory and remembrance and how we kind of look back at moments or even photographs and like see them in this blurry context beneath the paper pulp surface. So yeah, once we get some more imagery, I'll tell you some more. Yeah, so I started embedding my silver gelatin prints, as you see here, with natural materials, and then also kind of incorporating both of those things into my book arts practice. So this is a piece called Burying a Book, and it's embedded with tobacco. And then if you go to the next slide, and then the next slide, and then like tulips and leaves, and also more photographs of my body interacting with the world, but also the natural world too. I used my camera kind of as a lens to document my walks through where I lived in Georgia, but then also the city of Chicago. Next image. I also started kind of exploring these ideas of the natural elements kind of embodying gestures, very similar to Erica, but also almost in like a natural way with these elements that I was collecting. And then, yeah, next slide, that's perfect. I circle back to our inherent connection with nature. As humans, is it possible that we better understand ourselves or each other through nature, to better understand life or death? I use the gesture of these plant materials, that kind of embody these emotions and gestures, like falling or floating here, like these seeds, the sunflower. So collection is a really big part of my practice, collecting natural materials, going on walks. In the summer here in Athens, I work on a farm. And so a lot of times when we like cut off things that are no longer serving the plant, I actually end up using those in my paper works, and being really inspired by the growing landscape around me. So a lot of those materials find their way into my work, both my paper works and then my books. And then if you keep going to, there's a picture of my studio. So then I went to grad school at the University of Georgia, studying printmaking and then book arts. And I had a lot of collected things in my studio. I was working on these large 6 feet by 6 feet paper works that I got a grant from the Wilson Center from, and just was like really exploring scale. To be able to do that in grad school was really exciting, to like spread out and work outside. If you go to the next slide. It was just really exciting to be in a space where that was possible, besides working in my tiny backyard or something like that. Next slide. And I was really interested in how moving around this mold and decal, moving my body around this really large object, kind of became like performative. So go to the next slide. Kind of mixing these paper fibers and pigments and natural materials together. I started putting a lot of dried flowers and tea leaves into my work. And it almost became, I was like imagining when I was mixing these very large cups of tea with my body, and really finding comfort and healing in that action. And then also being able to experiment with the surface of the paper itself. You go to the next slide. I started making holes in the physical surface of the paper, thinking about like the slipping, fading, warped nature of memory, how we kind of think of these events and with time they slowly fill with holes. We can't remember the date or the time or the place, what time of day it was, the way the light was catching objects. So our memory is slowly slipping, maybe even without us noticing. Next slide. So I started creating these portals, kind of layering these papers together on top of each other, zooming in, if you go to the next slide, and looking at texture and surface and the things that I could embed in the paper with layering. And then next slide, thinking about the way I could manipulate them. So here, even thinking about process and the way I was embedding things, I was also coating the surface with light sensitive chemistry with cyanotypes, and exposing direct materials from the natural world, and then also negatives as well, and then soaking that in a tea bath that, you can go to the next slide, created a darker, deeper blue tone that I was really looking for in this very like melancholy, romantic, looking back and at memory and remembrance. I love this piece. It's one of my favorite pieces. It's titled "A Piece of You Inside of a Part of Me." And thinking about these objects that have no reference of the human figure, but kind of embodying memory and sensation through color and shape and texture and the things that I'm embedding inside them. If you go to the next slide. This is another T-tone cyanotype where I was using Queen's Anne's lace to expose the surface to create these like cloud-like images. you go to the next slide. This piece is called A Hole to See the Sky Through. And I was doing a lot of research in my writing practice with Yoko Ono and her piece. It's an index card with a hole cut out in the center that you hold up to the sky to see and curate your own bit of sky. And so I was thinking about that action and how we remember looking at the sky. And if we're inside and we're thinking about a moment, like what did the sky look like that day? And so kind of guiding the viewer to look at this piece and to almost compare a memory and to see how it is similar and how it's different and how maybe we don't really know if our memory is true or not, or if it's warped or slipped or has become a compilation of many memories put together. If you go to the next slide. So this is my thesis work from my last year of grad school. It was a large series called Instances of Seeing. And it was both a large 6-foot paper and then these boxes on the table were interactive guided experiences with books inside that kind of instructed you to move from one layer to the next. I'm going to focus on the paperwork. So if you go to the next slide, this is Instances of Seeing 1. And I was thinking a lot about these holes as kind of like glimpses into memory, of portals, of layering different memories together and then collaging them and fragmenting them back out for the viewer. So it's just like small vignettes or glimpses into a world and kind of entering it kind of as these shadowed figures you can see and the places that you can kind of, they don't really tell you what place they are specifically. And I think that kind of allows access and agency for the viewer to kind of insert themselves into the narrative. So you can slide through to the next couple, just giving close detail shots of the materials I'm floating. And I'm also connecting the images that are on handmade paper through stitching. So if you go, I think it's the next slide. Okay, the next one. I was responding to the material and really when I was stitching them, kind of following the bubbling or the shape that was kind of created in the paper making stages. So I was kind of creating these holes in the wet stage with just the hose and like kind of like creating these shapes. And so wherever the pulp kind of laid on top of itself, this is all abaca, it became denser and kind of had this rippling effect of almost like when you drop a pebble in water and it kind of like ripples out, these kind of like layered images. And so they're kind of translucent in places and darker in others. And kind of responding to that with the stitching was a really exciting moment for me, thinking about the stitching as almost like a dotted line on a map that you're kind of following around this typography of a surface. And like what kind of surface this is, the landscape of memory, kind of following from like one X to another, and how that kind of interacts with the embedded material I'm using too. So this is the last piece in the slideshow. No one wanting to say what soul was, and it's the piece in the triennial. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ciel, for sharing your work with us. Now I think we have a really exciting news, which Georgie will talk about it.
Okay, we are so excited about these artists and their talent, and it's my pleasure to announce the award winners. But first, I want to acknowledge and thank the sponsors: Minnesota Center for Book Arts, Hand Papermaking Magazine, North American Hand Papermakers, Morgan Conservatory, and the Legacy Press. So our award winners: Erica Honson is receiving a Minnesota Center for the Book Arts Workshop, Janice Lardy, Morgan Conservatory Workshop, Haley Krob, Hand Papermaking Magazine subscriptions, Jacques-Marie Feliciano, I hope I pronounced that right, Jacques-Marie, Hand Papermaking Magazine subscription, Maeve Leslie, Hand Papermaking Magazine subscription, Marisa Liz Gomez, Hand Papermaking Magazine subscription, Kate Bennett, a hand papermaking magazine subscription. Rebecca Teague, North American Hand Papermaker 2-year membership. Erasima Quesada, she is also receiving a North American Hand Papermaker 2-year membership. Caitlin Dalis is receiving a 2-year membership. Chad Hayward is receiving a 2-year membership. Henry Obenge is receiving a 2-year membership. Veronica Pham is receiving a 2-year membership. And Kristen Klingman is receiving a Legacy Press $50 gift certificate. Congratulations to everyone. And thank you again to our sponsors. Sanaz?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, everyone, and congratulations to all the artists. And I cannot stop like watching your work. They're amazing, beautiful. And thank you again for sharing your story with us. So now if you have any questions, we can go through the questions and talk about, share the question, please.
Yes, we have a couple minutes for questions, so please ask your questions to our wonderful presenters. Thank you all so much for presenting. It's been such a nice, amazing way to see all of this work and hear more about it. I also want to remind everyone that the entire exhibition is going to be on view on our website. It's currently up and it will remain up for a while. So not only will the works be traveling around, but you'll also be able to see it virtually as well if you aren't near any of the locations.
Thank you, Beth, for those information. Actually, I have a question from Lynn. I know that in 2019 you celebrated the 20th birthday of Triennial, and my question, and this is the 21st, and my question is, what kept you to continue this? It's hard. It's not an easy job, and taking care, sending invitation, and all these things. I'm just, thank you.
I had to unmute myself. Well, that's a really great question. And really, like I would say right now, Sanaz of all people knows something about how much work it really does take. But, I almost feel speechless. I don't think I have a brilliant answer to this because I'm always pretty busy with my own work and with teaching and life and all, but somehow every time the cycle came around again, somebody was willing to say, yes, I'll help you on that, Lynn. And so, I cited some of the co-directors over the years, but for 6 months once, I was interim director at Columbia College, Chicago Center for Book and Paper Arts. And so the Triennial just naturally kind of migrated there, and that was Command Central, and then another time, it was more oriented towards people that were in New Jersey. We had jurors that were in New Jersey, and there were always really interesting figures in the world of hand paper making art that said, yeah, when we would ask them to be the jurors, even though that in itself was a really big job. And I have to say that I just don't think I could have ever looked myself in the mirror again if I were to have stopped doing the show for that period of time. Because every time it gathered all these really wonderful, diligent, brilliant students. And I mean, you all just saw two of the most wonderful presentations by, oh my gosh, well, okay, brain fart, but by the two of our wonderful two presenters that I will write your names down as soon as I finish talking. But, you know, I don't think that there's any reason to stop it. And I'm just really glad that NAHP felt the same way, and that it's kind of out of my hands a little bit now, and I can just kind of sit back and go, whoa, this is so cool and so worthwhile to me.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so inspiring too to show like new people in papermaking as they enter the field that there are viable options for exhibitions and for entering into the field in this way and making a lot of connections, not only with like the jurors who will probably remember their people's names again, but also getting to come to the conference and things like that and make a lot of like friendships happen, and with all of the other students that are also in the show, then it builds a network that is kind of hard to come by otherwise. In particular, then I feel like a lot of papermaking classes are on the smaller side just because a lot of studios are a little bit smaller. So, you know, studio space, and a lot of people don't even know about papermaking until they get into like either a college situation or they happen upon it. So it's really nice to expand everybody's like network with peers through a show like this. So it's been absolutely fantastic to see every year's student entries come out and everybody come through.
Well, I think we have some fantastic questions coming up in the Q&A for our two student artist presenters. Jerusha has a couple questions. First, she's asked, obviously we all love paper, but for someone unfamiliar with papermaking, what would you say paper offers that other media does not? That's an excellent question.
Yeah, so I'd love to hear what everybody says about that. Will be informal, so whoever jumps in can go first.
I can jump in. I would say the thing that I respond to the most is how physical it is. It's a very like interactive bodily experience. It's almost really similar to working in the darkroom. Like you go through these steps to get to the final end product. And I feel like really productive, like pulling sheets, pressing them, putting in the dry room, and like this revelation, like reveal when you open them back up and see how different the material has changed through the drying process. You know, colors shift, stretching or warping can really happen. I really respond to even like air dried pieces that kind of just completely change overnight. And it's a really exciting moment to kind of see what the material has given you in a lot of ways. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that. I'm also really interested in what happens during the drawing process, and in all of the pull paintings that I did, they looked incredibly different when they were wet as opposed to when they were dry. Like the bamboo in particular, when I first painted it, there were so many highlights that I put in just with the unpigmented bamboo fiber, and when it dried, all of that was translucent. Like you couldn't see anything that I had, like there was very little detail left of what I had painted. So then I had to go back in painting it when it was after it was dry, or it was mostly dry. But it also, like when you're painting with paper on paper, your image is within the paper and not sitting on the surface like ink does in printmaking. So that's part of what draws me to it, is that the substance and the image is all one, not separate.
Yeah, fantastic. Lynn, Georgie, and Sanaz, do you have anything to add to that?
Lynn, go ahead. I will start.
You know, I was personally almost a little bit resistant at the very beginning to paper making, I kind of wasn't instantly enamored with it, but when I realized that I could paint with it, it just seemed like, whoa, you know, you can do things with this medium that you cannot do with other paint. And so there's, you know, there's the physical of what you can do and how you can manipulate. But then, you know, there's also the process thing that I think you all have already kind of mentioned, which is, you know, when you're in that, even if, you know, it takes you completely out of every other thing that's in your head and puts you into focus with, you know, your interaction and dialogue with your work. It's just, the process is really all encompassing and physical. And so there isn't really anything about it that doesn't actually augment the art making process for me.
I think Lynn summed it up beautifully.
Yes, agreed. Sanaz, any thoughts on that, or should we move on? Up to you.
I just want to say that as an interdisciplinary artist, I think the reason that I love paper making is that process, that long process. I love it. It's like meditation. It's like you have time while you are working to think about your work, to think about what do you do, what's the next step. And I love those quiet, it's not quiet, of course, we hear sound of water and smell of pulp, and it's just wonderful. I cannot stop thinking about paper making. That was my answer.
Yeah, I love that. Exactly. Paper really can capture so many people because it can do so many things. Scout asked, Erica, you poured the painting you created or used pulp painting for the actual painting portion?
The base sheet is a pulp pour, but the image is all pulp painted. And for each piece, the fiber that I used for the pulp paint is the same as the fiber for the base sheet. So on the Abaca piece that's in the show, it's an Abaca pulp paint on an Abaca base sheet.
Amazing. They're so beautiful. Ciel, I also noticed that I thought that your mold was on casters on wheels. Is that true? Amazing. I love that. It makes it so versatile.
Yeah, it was so big. I had to get some way to move it by myself sometimes. So wheels are always a great idea.
Yeah, I love that. And then our final question is from Jerusha. Are you continuing in the same vein of work, or is it shifting? I'm not sure if she meant either of you in particular, but I feel like that's a good question for both of the students. So feel free, whoever feels like answering.
I think I work in a lot of different processes, and part of why I did this for my thesis work was because I had access to the mold and the space to create this work while I was at UArts. I don't have access to that mold or the space anymore, so until I can find that again, this vein of work is a little bit on pause, but it is something that I'm interested in continuing working with, doing large scale pulp paintings. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Ciel?
Yeah, I would just jump in and say, I agree with Erica in a lot of ways. I think everyone kind of experiences paper making, and then access becomes a really big thing, like resources. I pretty much intentionally went into grad school being like, I want to do something large scale because I know that I won't be able to do it once I don't really have that huge studio access. But also I was really inspired by Erica. Your exploration of multiple different fibers is like wonderful. I wish that I had kind of explored multiple avenues. I think that was like a really lovely way to do research in every single fiber and kind of get experience with that fiber and how it responds differently to pigmentation, but also like the drying process and things like that. So yeah, really cool.
Great, thank you so much. And we do have one other question, but to keep us on kind of on time, then I am going to have Terry's question pasted in the chat. Erica, it's for you. And Jerusha just added to what she said in there. So I'm going to put both of those in the chat. And I cannot thank you guys enough for this, a lovely presentation. And the show looks absolutely amazing. I hope that I get to see it in person at some point, because while I think that the photos are fantastic, I'm sure that there's so much richness that gets a little bit lost digitally when you translate paper.